My name is Alison. I am a freelance software engineer, and today I am going to be asking you a couple of questions. The first of it, which is React translated yet? That is to say, can you find the official React documentation website in a language other than English? And at the beginning of the year, the answer was no, you couldn't. It was only available in English, not Chinese, not Spanish, or Russian, or French. And the React team realized that this was a huge problem, but didn't have the resources to tackle it because, they were working on React. So this guy, who some of you may be familiar with, Dan Abramoff, hired this gal for a couple of weeks to get the official translations set up. And today I'm going to be talking about this project and its importance. In particular, why should React be translated? How is React translated, and how can you yourself help translate React? I'm going to take you on a journey through the virtual world filled with political intrigue and killer robots and OSS community management, and we'll talk about the lessons that we learned along the way. So let's get started with asking, why should React be translated? If you're like David Dudebro over here, you may ask, bruh, why don't you just get good in English? And to that, my response would be just to block the guy because he's an asshole. But if I were feeling more generous, I would reply and say that not everyone knows English or has the time or privilege to learn it. More than 80% of the world's population doesn't know English. And if we restrict React, one of the world's most popular JavaScript frameworks, you restrict who gets to create and shape the web. Translating React is a way to empower more people to learn to code and shape the face of technology themselves. Aditya Mukherjee has a really good talk about this at JSConf.eu that explains why translation is important. So if you're still interested in this topic, I would suggest that you check out his talk. Now, global accessibility is the most apparent reason to translate, but there's also another interesting reason why official translations are important. So it turns out if you don't make official documentation in a language, people just end up making it themselves. This isn't the official reactjs.org. This is a couple of employees of Tencent that saw the need of Chinese React docs and made their own. And while researching, I found versions in Korean, in Arabic, and more. And on one hand, this is good because that means that there is a demand for these kinds of translations. People see the need for documentation in their own language. But why can't we just leave it in that and leave it up to them? The problem is these translations are hard to find. There is a lot of uncertainty when it's not under the right domain that you expect, under reactjs.org. What if the translations are wrong? What if they're outdated? By giving them our official support, people have higher confidence that the docs that they're reading are correct. Moreover, we can support the people who are actually translating the docs. Giving access to the React team means people can ask for clarifications how to translate certain technical words. We can inform people when new documentation is about to be released so they can be prepared. And at the end of the day, what it boils down to is translation is pretty good. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, what are our criteria for translation? Number one, translations should be high quality. If they're just auto-translated through Google Translate, it's easy for people to tell. It's hard to read. And it feels like the React team really just didn't care if that happens. And bad translations make for good memes, but they make for really bad documentation. Again, the point is to make React accessible as possible, so it should be easy as well for contributors to translate. And we can't do that if there are barriers to contributing. Finally, translations should be kept up to date. A stale translation, one that isn't accurate to the current version of the React docs, is pretty much as good as an incorrect one. This can cause rumors and disinformation to spread if, say, a fix to an error isn't updated. And the React community knows the power of an unchecked error and rumors flying about and causing bad ESLint rules. But anyways, so we've outlined why translations are important, and let's talk about how we do it. Our initial strategy was to use Crowden, which is software as a service that lets people make translations in a web app. It has a lot of nice features like autocomplete. Yarn uses it, Electron uses it, lots of different open source projects use it. In fact, we were already setting up a PR in order to finish the translation, and my job initially was to finish that pull request. And we were already sending people to translate stuff on Crowden, expecting it to finish the integration soon. So it should be simple, right? It seems like a pretty solid software. Well, let's look at the 3 criteria that we're searching for again. Translation should be high quality. There was honestly not that much accountability between the different translations, which meant people often just Google translated the keywords like into Indonesian right here. And while it would be cool if there are functional keywords in JavaScript, but as far as I know, that's not a TC39 proposal to turn, to make Indonesian keywords. So that's not a good thing. 2, it should be easy for translators to contribute. Crowden was a new UI that most developers didn't know that well. It didn't handle markup well. Often I looked at projects that were made on Crowden and their markup was there were stray HTML tags everywhere. I myself had a lot of trouble trying to figure out how to change various settings for it. For example, adding different permissions to it. So that's also a bust. Translation should be kept up to date. Updating to a new version of the site to keep the translations updated was kind of a pain. It was an arduous process that took hours and kind of just like clobbers the previous translation and leaves the next one untranslated. It was impossible to get a local version of the site running in a language. You had to download all the languages and then set up that process. We simply couldn't figure out that integration. And at some point, the word symlinks was mentioned when we were trying to make it, and by that point, you have a lost cause. So I started looking into alternative designs. There are other frameworks like TransifeX, but it seems that Crowden was the most popular among open source, and they didn't really solve the issues that we had with Crowden. Maybe we could put everything in one repo in a translations folder with folders for the different languages. That sounds promising, but the React repo gets hundreds of issues and pull requests a day, not per day, just in general. Imagine multiplying that by 40 different languages and you have a cluster fork. We were stumped, and so whenever the React team finds a design problem that they can't solve, the first thing that comes to mind is to look at what Vue does. And as it turns out, Vue has translations in different forks of the main repository. For example, Russian is stored in ru.vuejs.org in a different repo. And this solves the problem of having too many PRs, since each GitHub repo has its own issues and pull requests. But how do they keep the translations up to date? Well, the Russian translation, we talked to them and they said, every time that there's new changes, they cherry pick the new ones onto the current branch and edit the translations manually. But that's a lot of work, a lot of friction, and that's not something that we can expect all our translators to be able to do. One particularly interesting thing that Dan noticed was that the Japanese language branch had a bot called Shetsumi. It's a pun on cherry picking and tea picking. Japanese has a lot of puns. The bot would cherry pick new commits, and if there aren't any conflicts, for example, if it was just a code change, it would just create a pull request for it. If there were conflicts, it would raise an issue to maintainers so they knew that a translation needed to be updated. And this system, we thought it was brilliant, and it solved the main issue that we had. We could use Git itself to keep track of what stuff to change or what stuff to retranslate. This method struck us as the best solution. GitHub is really good. We could use its authentication and permissions to assign maintainers to each repo, and they could do pull requests and code review each other, so that takes care of quality. It's a system that a lot more developers are familiar with. And moreover, people like to contribute to the React project on GitHub to be able to boost their open source cred. So that's also good. And by making a bot and using Git itself to track updates, we can get our third criterion, which is keeping the translations up to date. So I made the approach official using a GitHub issue, and we got started. But what if we start translations for like 20 different languages and it turns out there's sort of some fatal flaw in our project that renders all of it useless? Well, the solution to that is the solution to how all complex software problems start out, which is to start small. We looked at 3 different languages that we wanted as our test subjects. Japanese, because the Vue.js Japanese team graciously offered to help with the React translations as well as provide advice on how to make our own bot. Spanish, because a lot of them worked on Dan's blog and he trusted them. And the third language we picked is Chinese with simplified Han characters. Remember the unofficial React docs? Well, we just thought these people already put in the work anyways, why not sponsor their work and make them official and give them our support? Dan got them set up with repos in Git. We let them get started while I worked on building the bot. And throughout this process, we learned a couple of things that would have been a pain to deal with if we had just had a free-for-all and done all the language and let anyone start a language. First of all, GitHub is complicated. There's like a lot of features. Do you know how permissions work on GitHub teams? I didn't when I started this project. Should we use code owners? Should we use GitHub projects? I said all this to Dan, and he gave me a good piece of advice, which is to keep it simple. So we went with a to-do list. We just had a single issue with all the pages to translate. People could comment with pages that they wanted to translate, and this worked out pretty well, and we could expand that system if we needed to. Another issue that one of our contributors from the Japanese talks noticed is that we needed to fix our headers. Right now, try React gets turned into a hash called try React with a dash. But if you change the language, hashes are auto-generated. So if you change the language, such as to Spanish with Prueba React, the title just gets generated as Prueba React. So whenever you wanted to, if you started out with English and want to switch to the Spanish docs, you would lose your position. This is even worse for languages with non-Latin characters because they get turned into React E3, A2, 92, E8, A9. Anyways, yeah. So we worked on this together to create a Gatsby plugin and a script to support custom IDs. That way we can keep next to the headers. I made a script to automatically add those IDs, and it worked like a charm. We could keep the same headings, the same hashes while changing the headings to different languages. This ended up saving us a lot of work. If we started on like 10 or 20 different translations already, there would have been a lot of manual work, and people already like started translating different headings. There would have been a lot of manual work needed to replace these headings with the versions with explicit tags. So tip number 2 is get this hard stuff sorted out early. Another question that we had is, what do we call the different subdomains? Should it be JP or JA for Japanese? How do we differentiate between simplified Chinese, which is used in mainland China and Singapore, and traditional Chinese, which is used in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau? Dan posted a tweet asking for advice on this. We got a lot of sometimes heated replies, which is why my next tip is to be cognizant of complex geopolitical situations. We decided on ZH Hans and ZH Han, which are the official codes for Chinese written with traditional or simplified Han characters. It was the most neutral and descriptive, and also, what a lot of other companies use. Use language codes, not countries. The people who speak one language aren't restricted to a single country. So anyways, now that we got all that sorted out of the way, it's time to open up to more languages, which brings me to my next question: how do we hashtag scale the translation process? On the GitHub pull request, we already had 10 languages that are interested in starting. That means setting up 10 repos, adding 2 times 10 maintainers, and teaching even more people about the process on how to translate. Well, since we were relying on bots anyways to sync, why not automate the whole process? It turns out, while researching, that GitHub had a pretty good API. And while researching how the Vue team made their bot, I made the most amazing discovery. Did you all know that you can just run JavaScript, not on a website? Just from a console, just Node. It's amazing. So that's what I did. I made my own create script that made a copy of the React repo, invited maintainers to the React.js org, and set up different permissions. I made it so that setting up a language was just adding a JSON file to a repo so that anyone can make a pull request to offer to be a maintainer. I made a website to get people excited so I could see all their progress at once and see the little numbers go up. And it worked like a charm. We had like 10 different languages set up the very first day. The Spanish and Japanese were more than halfway complete since they were our test languages. Brazilian Portuguese was moving blazingly fast. And then it got banned from GitHub for running too many bots, which is bad because all the issues were under my account, so no one could actually see them, which ground progress to a halt, which brings me to my next question. How the fork do I get unsuspended from GitHub? And the answer to that is have your client beg the CEO of Twitter to unsuspend you. But it worked. We started like a cute little Twitter mob that like bugged a bunch of GitHub employees, and they fixed it up. Oops, right quick. But if I may put a little spin to it, this is actually a good thing because it means people are really interested and passionate about the project and really, really want to work on this. And once you have all that passion, once you have all that momentum, how do you manage all that and keep it going? Step 1, remove friction. Make sure it's clear how to contribute to a language or how to start up a new repo. Provide guides on their responsibilities for being a repo maintainer. Automate as much of the boilerplate as you can, like changing the URL to the subdomain. Make a Slack channel so that people can reach out to you with questions. Make it as easy as possible for people to do what they came here to do. Step 2, get people motivated. Oops. Track progress on the website with cute little emoji when you reach milestones. People love watching numbers go up, so this is a good way to track, get people motivated to keep going. Make announcements on Twitter when new languages start up, when people finish an important milestone. Remind people how important doing their work is. Step 3, have a system in place. Make sure there are at least 2 people on each repo so they can cross-check each other. Verify they've had open source experience or are fluent speakers. If necessary, prevent translations by getting stalled by reassigning pages if the original person can't contribute anymore. Step 4, give ownership. Offer tools, but aside from the bare minimum, let people do things how they want. Some languages need a really complex and really sophisticated system of tags to keep track of which PRs are in which state. There are a lot of issues related to localization that, like right-to-left text or which fonts are the best for which languages, that are a lot of these developers coming from those communities know a lot more than I did. And they're talented developers. Empower them to make their own changes. And you'll find that they'll help build the community and contribute back to the original English repo. Although sometimes inexperienced contributors, like this Gairon person over here, end up contributing Russian to the English repo accidentally. But above all, be patient, be kind, and be helpful. Some languages might have a dedicated team, but others only have 2 or 3 people wanting to translate something into their native language because they've never seen a big documentation translated to it before. Sometimes your translators are on vacation, and you probably shouldn't bug them about their biggest holiday of the year, about finishing translations. Sometimes life gets in the way and people have to just quit, and that's okay. Remember, contributors are volunteers who are doing this out of a sense of commitment to open source. Be kind, be a voice of support, and always ask how you can help. Finally, we're going to get a little bit into the more technical side and ask how do we keep the translations up to date. As you remember, we want to make a bot to track the changes. So the way this bot works is we first just need to cherry pick the official React docs, and well, there was an error. That's okay. We can just like commit everything, and oh geez, there's another error. We just need to commit again, and you know what? Screw this. We're just going to use Git Merge. If new content doesn't cause conflict, for example, if there's a code logic change, we can just merge it in. Otherwise, we actually merge the conflict and set up a PR for it and assign it to the maintainers so that they can review the conflicts themselves and add the right translation. So this seems pretty simple, and now we just need to put it on a bot. The question is, how do I make a bot? I don't know. I'm a front-end developer. Is Heroku still a thing? Is that what I'm supposed to do? Yeah, it was really hard for me because I mainly worked with like front-end code. And for most of the time that I was under contract, the bot was actually just me running the script. It was just me running the script over and over again every like couple of days when I'm like see the React repo get updated. I tried using, it's like, well, I need to run this every 3 days, so I just set an interval for every 3 days and that'll work, right? Well, it doesn't because I'm cheap and I use Heroku free nodes and they like to go up and down and the set interval resets. There was this thing called a Heroku scheduler, which was supposed to be like really reliable and like run your things for you. It was all lies and it never actually ran the things that you wanted to schedule. Days and nights, this stupid bot haunted my every waking moment, eating away at my soul. In my time of desperation, in my time of great need, what will come and save me? Is it some hot new enterprise-to-enterprise SaaS product for distributed scheduling? Is it some sort of advanced async wizardry that relied on a bunch of TC39 stage 1 proposals? Was it the blockchain? Turned out it was cron, which, if you don't know, is this nice little Unix utility with a format that lets you schedule something with a lot of different options. For example, setting something to run every 2 or 3 days. And there was a JavaScript version of it. So I never have to leave the comfort of my own JavaScript. And it worked like a charm. It now updates Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and my soul can rest easy now. So, after all that, what worked and what didn't? The first lesson is done is better than perfect. There are definitely things that we could have added or done better. The to-do list got too big and unwieldy and had a lot of them for popular languages got like 200 replies. Maybe we should have used code owners all along. Committing Git conflicts is definitely kind of a questionable move. But if we just went with Crowden, I don't think we would be where we are today. Which isn't to say don't use Crowden. There are a lot of tools that work with it, but it wasn't the right tool for us. Crowden works really well with Docusaurus, so if you're using that, Crowden is a really good option. But just like we learned from Vue, the next open source project will have us as a reference and be able to do something better. The second lesson is trust but verify. There are a lot of talented React developers all around the world. Trust and empower them to build up their own communities. At the same time, we've had instances where people say contributors are neglectful and will merge in the Git conflicts, for example. And we've had to do the hard thing of removing them. And that's okay, but again, do so with kindness and understanding. The third lesson is quality localization takes effort. Building a community is an ongoing project that can't be completed in a 3-week contract. It's not enough to just finish an integration and call it a day. It takes moderation, tooling, outreach, and a lot of compassion if you want to do it right. But it's worth it because localization is accessibility. And like any accessibility issue, it's not something that you can just half-ass. You have to really care about it and care about the people involved. So, 7 months later, here at React Rally, I ask again, is React translated yet? And to that, I can proudly say, Nam, Ye, Tak, Si, Tak, Evet, Da, Shi, Hai, We, Sim, and Si. Yes, React is translated. So finally, how can you help translate React? How can you make it even more translated and bring it to more languages and more people? You can go to Is React Translated Yet? And there should be a different links for the languages that you want to translate to, such as Arabic, The internet is really bad here. Whoops. If you don't see your language, send a PR to the react.org translation repo, and I will get to it. Spread the word through social media if you're part of any of these language communities. And finally, I just want to thank Dan Abramov, Brian Vaughn, Eric Nakagawa, and the rest of the React team for helping me with this project, and also making the product that we all know and love. And to more than 180 different maintainers and contributors, too many of whom to list, who helped make this happen. This is your work, and without you, we wouldn't be here today. Thanks to you, React is translated. And if you have any questions or want to reach out to me, my Twitter is @Tesseralis. It's also my GitHub username. Thank you.